Hi, everyone. I am Allison. Thank you for joining me for where I'm from, 177, which is a fun number to me. Joining me is poet Dan Simpson, and usually I talk about what I'm reading. So what I am reading is, or I just read it actually. I'm mostly here to enjoy myself by Glynis McNichol.
Mm.
The subtitle is One Woman's Pursuit of Pleasure in Paris, and it is a memoir about her time there in the summer of 2021. And she is a child-free and single by choice person. And it's her sort of talking about being that person and making the choice to enjoy herself, which feels pretty revolutionary at the age of 46, which she is in this book. Because, we live in a society where I think we would like women, a lot of people would like women to be smaller and quieter and less autonomous. And so this felt like a really powerful book to read because I love reading books about people who are thinking about life and the choices they want to make and making those choices. So for me, I enjoyed it a lot. What are you reading, Dan?
Well, right now I'm rereading, and this has
Mm-hmm.
been like a
Mm-hmm.
probably 50-year gap, but I'm rereading Spoon River Anthology
Oh,
by
wow.
Edward Lee Masters. I
Mm-hmm.
read the Glenrock Book of the Dead, and which is lots of vignettes that um, are kind of interwoven
Mm-hmm.
with each other,
Mm-hmm.
and got thinking, oh yeah, this is sort of like Spoon River Anthology. I'm about halfway through it, and it's really interesting to go back to it because it's darker in a lot of ways than I remembered.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, people are speaking from the grave, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, uh,
Mm-hmm.
there are definitely very happy people who lived lives that were fulfilling, but there is a lot of, uh, well, here's why I actually murdered this person, or why
Mm-hmm.
they murdered me, or
Mm-hmm.
uh, how I ripped somebody off in a big way and they never found out. It's kind of that's how it's a little, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm halfway in. I'm going to keep
Mm-hmm.
going, but it's just been interesting to read it. And a
Rereading
book that
is interesting. Are you a big
is
rereader?
um I no, I'd like to be more. I would actually, in general, like to make more time to read than I do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big believer in, if you're going to write, you need to read.
Mm-hmm.
So I always have a couple of books going, but I tend to I think I tend to overfill my schedule. So
Yeah.
and I have to, but yeah, I do love to reread. There are certain books. This sounds like bragging, but I I've reread Ulysses several times by
Please
Joyce.
brag about reading. I think we need
Yeah.
more people to brag about reading.
Yeah, well, that's a book I remember I wanted to read in college.
Hmm.
I had a really fabulous English teacher in my senior year in high school who we had to read Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man.
Hmm.
I
I read
found it
that. Mm.
really tough going at first, and I was
So
like,
did I.
Mrs. Sondernach, this is really hard. I don't understand some of this. She's like,
Yeah.
just keep going. And I liked her,
Yep.
so I said, okay, I'll
Hmm.
keep going. And then I got interested in Ulysses. There was a great talking book reader who was an actor named Alexander Scorby.
Hmm.
And I half of the pleasure was hearing it was a tour de force, like somebody who could read
Hmm. Hmm.
many languages.
Hmm.
If he didn't know the science that if he didn't know all the references, he read them convincingly. And
Hmm.
I just so anyway, that book is what I have come back to several times.
I have a question. What's the difference between a talking book and an audiobook?
Um, it's really the same thing.
Hmm.
A talking book was a name that was applied to, well, because let me say as a blind person, y'all weren't reading audiobooks, but
Exactly. That's what I wondered if it was just something that, again, something that the disabled community came up with that, you
yeah,
realized like, oh, this is brilliant.
Yeah,
Everyone should be doing this.
yeah, that's what happened.
Okay.
The first talking books I th were on 33 and a third
Mm.
long playing albums, if I
Wow.
remember correctly. And
Yeah.
they would come in these big, big boxes, mailing containers, and
Wow. Mm.
yeah, so it's essentially the same thing.
hmm Yeah. It's amazing how much innovation comes out of, different communities that then everyone pretends that never happened. So,
Yeah, yeah, and that's true. We really don't know the history of it, but
Yeah.
that's really how it got started, I think.
Mm. Thank you
Yeah.
for that.
I love when you ask questions like that.
I'm a naturally very curious person, and
Well, be as curious as you want, nosy as you'd like.
thank you. That was not an attribute when I was a kid that everyone
Yeah,
appreciated.
I
So
know.
it's nice that I feel like I have curated my life in such a way that most of the people who are in it now appreciate it. So
Yeah.
it's one
Oh,
of the things
fun.
I'm more grateful for in my life. Like, wow, I've done a good job as I've
Yeah.
aged. Um,
Yeah.
so we were going to talk about another book before I asked you that.
Oh, yeah. A book that I keep coming back to also. And again, I have so this is interesting to me anyway. Um, it's Patrick Otuma's anthology, 50 Poems That Will Change Your Life, I think it's called.
Mm.
Um, and I may not have that title quite right,
No,
but the
the
he
general idea.
he reads the audio
Hmm
book, and but I like it in Braille too, because one of the problems with audio books and poetry is you can't see or feel the shape of the poem
hmm
in audio. And
hmm
even in a lot of books now are produced electronically, and it's great. You can download, half of a library onto a Braille
hmm
display, but you're only looking at one line of text. And there are these pins sort of that pop up in the shape of the Braille
I
letters.
wondered how it worked
Yeah.
electronically.
And then there's a forward, there are advancing and rewinding buttons. Um,
hmm
but you can only see one line at a time. So I still really love hard copy Braille. But anyway, but those poems,
I
there are a
love
lot
hard
of,
copy, by the way,
yeah, do
for
you?
the same reason. Even, yeah, I mean, not the exact same reason, obviously, but yeah, I like to feel the book. I
Yeah.
like to, it works in my brain better. I remember
Hmm.
it better when I
Hmm.
read it on actual paper than when I read it
Interesting.
electronically. I
Yeah.
feel like it's like there's some relationship between the material that's different.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I can definitely see that with Braille.
And
Like
of course,
I would,
you can't smell an audiobook either.
you can't spell an audiobook. You can't, I don't know if you have this habit, but I like to see, how many more pages I have in the book,
Hmm.
the chapter or the book, or I just sort of like to move or I feel like I orient myself in a physical book in a different way. It's just more alive
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah. Um, it's a little different. I mean, sometimes I do that, but Braille takes up so much more space,
Hmm
which is one of the reasons the Library of Congress has really moved toward, look, it's actually cheaper
hmm
if we provide everybody who wants it with a free, no frills Braille display. In other words, you can't also take notes and
hmm
use it as a word processor, but it's free, and now we don't have to make multiple copies for every regional
hmm
Braille library, and we don't have to send them out through the mail.
hmm
So there's a reason for it, but um,
Accessibility.
accessibility. But
Hmm
for instance, the Bible takes up 18 volumes in Braille,
Wow.
big books.
Wow.
Um, so like, yeah,
Yeah, that's a difference.
yeah,
Hmm Yeah, I imagine that. So there are separate Braille libraries.
yes.
Hmm
There are a lot more like audiobook libraries,
hmm
but even they are becoming more. I think they're probably doing a lot more tech support for people who are downloading their own books. But there are, there is a digital divide here
hmm
among blind people because
hmm
there are a lot of people who are either unemployed or underemployed,
Yep.
so they don't have the resources to buy cool technical equipment. And so
Yep.
libraries will still send you an audiobook or a bunch of audiobooks on a cartridge.
Hmm. Well, that makes me happy. I already love libraries.
Yeah, yeah. But then there are regional braille libraries. Yeah,
Hmm.
it's actually one of the bigger ones is in Philadelphia.
Which is where you are, correct?
Hmm.
Hmm. Um, okay, so those are the books you're reading.
Yeah.
I haven't thought of the Spoon River anthology. I had some, I'm like now in my brain, I had some exposure to it. I don't know if I read the whole thing, but it's like in some theater class, we performed pieces from it. Um,
Oh, really?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I was just like, oh wow. I love these poems for so many reasons and these conversations, but every time it reminds me of some part of myself. Selfishly,
Hmm.
I enjoy that.
Oh, well, in some ways, isn't that that's a little part of what we read. It's so cool. We read for what we know and what we don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think
Mm.
for me, for sure, especially when I was younger, it was like validating these things that I couldn't even admit I knew.
Yeah, yeah.
And then a book would
Wow.
say it. It's like, oh, I feel just like that. I'm not
Wow.
alone.
Do you remember like either the first or one of the early times
I
when
mean,
that
the bell
happened?
jar was a really big one for me.
Mm-hmm.
Reading, I I've thought about it since quite a bit, but I hadn't really read that many women up to that point. You know, I
Hmm.
had read, I mean, I'd read like Judy Blume, which I loved her.
Hmm.
And,
Hmm.
but I think, like you were saying, I read Joyce, you know, I read Jack London, I read like
Oh, yeah.
the canon, and I hadn't read women. And
Women.
I
Yeah.
remember picking up that book and I was going through a spectacularly hard time in my life, one of the
Mm-hmm.
hardest ever. And I just was like, okay, you know, I obviously the book has a happy ending, but Sylvia's story does not. I mean, happy
Yeah.
is, but I still felt like I never really had suicidal ideation, so I was lucky in that way, even though I was very depressed. And
Hmm.
I really felt seen by this woman who was so smart and
Hmm.
perceptive
Hmm.
and lived in a world where that was almost a disadvantage.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
It almost would have been better for her to be dulled by life instead of sharpened.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
felt like that.
Wow. It's really something too when you like, and especially when you think about the difference between how that book ends and how
Yeah.
her life ended.
Yeah.
But how books in some ways, and we kind of mix them up with the authors, but how books become our friends or, you
Hmm.
know, that feeling where I mean, my first, I'd say my seminal book was Charlotte's Web, like a lot of people.
The book just makes me cry even thinking
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just so good. And
Mhm.
my first grade teacher would read it to us, usually at the very end of the day. And I'm at this boarding school for the blind, and my parents weren't reading to me at night.
Mhm.
Um, but it was such an escape, kind of like,
Mhm.
and I had my mom's side of the family were farmers, so there was a way in which I felt connected to this farm.
Mhm.
And yeah,
Such an evocative book.
it is, and this. Oh, and I guess going back to like how those characters become your friends, and it's sort of
Mhm.
like you,
Yes.
you hate, like I want to, I really want to finish this and re see what happens, and I really don't want to finish it because then what? Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Because even as a kid, you're like, oh, this is like, something bad's gonna happen.
something's bad's going to
Hmm.
happen,
Yeah.
and it's going to be over, and then I mean, I think maybe it's funny. not a funny way, but in an interesting way, maybe. It's one of the earliest ways we learn about death.
Yeah, it's so important.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, oh, I love books. I could talk about books
Yeah,
forever.
yeah,
I feel like, but I think it's such a good reminder as writers that your book doesn't need to be as big as Charlotte's Web or Bell Jar to touch people and to help them feel seen. And
yeah.
our words matter. So would you like to read your poem,
I
Dan?
would love to read my poem. Yeah. Where I'm from. I am from Ajax and Windex, from charcoal smoke and fresh cut grass. I am from dogs kept in the kitchen and cats climbing on counters. I'm from ham radio in the bedroom, stereo in the living room, and TV in the rec room, an aural map of split level overlap. I'm from overgrown dogwood and a snowball bush with its loud perfume, the Pied Piper of bees. From radio baseball on a backyard swing. I am from presents after stockings, opened one at a time, handed out by youngest to eldest, in a family of peacemakers headed by Lewie and Mim. I'm from I'll give you something to cry about, to you look sharp, son, from the old rugged cross and I come to the garden. I come from Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and cow manure. We loved grocery store lobster tail and company sketty. I'm from Braille and talking books, The Cat in the Hat to The Catcher in the Rye. From a blind twin brother who rode the luge and bungee jumped, and from a dog that bit the tail off the Easter bunny. I am from tar bubbles and bee stings, from a faraway world of sunsets and rainbows my family described. I'm from spelling bees and wrestling tournaments that churned up my stomach, from cassettes and shoe boxes buried in closets. I am from peanut M&Ms and Love is Blue, from the mockingbird who annoyed me at 3 a.m. and whom I mourned when the cat made him stop. I am from the School for the Blind, where I was told, you eat like a polecat and you'll go far. My mother went far. At 98, she cooked her last meal for us, pork and sauerkraut. Happy New Year, she said 6 months before she died.
Mm, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sketty. I also had Sketty.
Yeah, Sketty. Yeah. Oh, I still love Sketty.
Smiled when I read it, and then it made me smile again when you read it.
Mm, mm.
What is a polecat?
Oh, it's I didn't know it back then, but it's a I think it's kind of in the I believe it's in the cat family, but it was like British derivation, at least according to my smart speaker, who could be completely wrong. But
I feel like it's one of those words that's used in sayings, like you being told you eat like a polecat. It's like, what is that? I just think
yeah,
it's interesting how sometimes we don't even really know what something is, but we know from context, and
well,
that's
I knew it
that's
wasn't
so.
good.
No, of course, that's what
I
I'm
knew it
saying.
wasn't good, and I think
Right.
it was like it was more kind of more interesting than you eat like a pig. Like, oh, a
Right.
polecat.
Right. How does a
And
polecat eat? I want to know more.
well,
Fast?
I think it was like if you had your head, like I think so. This came from a very colorful house mother who could be really, really harsh
Hmm.
and who had, in some ways, a heart of gold. Um,
It
and I
happens.
could tell you lots of stories about her. But
Hmm.
I'm working on I've been working on a memoir, which and I'm going to say I love. There was one time when you very gently said to somebody, you need to work on your positive self-talk. I love that because I could say that I'm embarrassed it's taking me as long as it
No,
has
no.
to write this book. But anyway, there are lots of stories about this person. And, um, I didn't know what polka was because, I mean, she also said, um, she would say, quit talking so much. You've been were you vaccinated with a telephone needle? And I'm like, what's a telephone needle? I think she meant phonograph needle. Now that think about
Right.
later. So I just accepted. I don't
Because
know.
it would have made me think of the switchboard. That's not what she means. Like
Yeah,
back in the day with the operator who plugs in the uh
yeah,
extensions or whatever.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And you
we
might have
actually
had
had
that at
that.
the school.
We did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, a telephone needle. I thought
Yeah.
maybe like the Wichita lineman. Like there's somebody up there on the pole who's like has some like needle, some like device.
Uh,
It's like a big kneading needle to like untangle the wires or something. I had no idea.
I love those things. There are how our imagination makes it make sense
Yeah.
because you can't say, "Hey, wait a minute." Can
Yeah,
you?
Miss Walters, what's a
Yeah.
telephone needle?
Right. Yes.
But I loved writing the poem.
Oh,
It's really and Ona I think told me that you do you write one a year?
I do. Yes. I made that promise to myself, and I've done it so far. Yeah.
It just seems like there's so many things you can say.
I think there
You
are. The person who gave me the idea was Georgella because she's written, countless ones. And I
hmm
was emailing with her just the other day, and she wrote something about hair, and she said, "Oh, that reminds me, I have one about hair."
Oh wow. Wow.
Like she just she's just a lovely,
Yeah.
joyful person. And obviously I'm very grateful for her poem and just who she is
Yeah.
and how
Yes.
generous she is with her words and her I just her spirit.
Mm-hmm.
She's a great role
Yeah.
model.
It's so good, like especially in these tough times. I think in some ways what we're
Yes.
really looking for is spirit. How do
Mhm.
we um who are the people that we feel that deep connection with?
Yeah, I think community is really essential. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I actually went to a talk that she did for Friends of Rothke, Theodore Rothke. I
hmm
think that's how you say his name. The Tuesday, and I loved it because she read from all different poets, and it was all about how do we how do we live now? How do we live
hmm
now well? And she sang a song. She has a beautiful voice.
Oh wow.
Yeah, just like a protest song because those are her
hmm
roots. And
hmm
um, and I loved how when she was talking about I don't remember what, but she said, "Oh, this is a great prompt for a poem. If you're ever trying to come up with an idea, just think about a place and just draw a floor plan of like the house you grew up in or where you worked or the school for the blind
hmm
and just write down some words about each like on the floor plan and you'll be surprised like it'll but just as she was talking about poetry and singing and like she's just like oh here's a good idea for how to write something and she treats everybody like they're a poet or
Yeah.
they're and I that is to me I think such an important trait in people I want to have in my life that they treat
Yeah.
everybody like they're of consequence.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I remember I wrote a poem a long time ago called We All Have Something of the Poet in Us. And I think
Oh, I love that.
it's kind of a
Mhm,
cool way to like
mhm,
for me to remember that
mhm.
for instance, when I think I'm very much um I'm very much opposed to this administration.
Same.
Um, but it's helpful to me. Like I've really learned to love country music.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly I think a lot of times the stories that they tell, the lyrics
Mhm.
are often better than rock lyrics. And I love
Oh, their
rock music.
poetry for sure.
Their poetry, yeah.
Yeah.
And and it's really helpful to remember that people I have really big, seemingly insurmountable disagreements with love those songs too, and
Hmm.
are and probably cry at
Hmm.
some of the same records that would make me cry,
Hmm.
that do make me cry. And
Yeah.
that's I so I have to work to hold on to that some days, but it's
Mhm.
there, it's true.
It is there.
Mm.
And I think, I mean, obviously many things incense me about what is going on, but I think the way people's vulnerabilities and fears are weaponized against them by
Yeah,
people who don't have their interests in mind.
yeah,
Um, that's one of the ones that gets me the most upset because, people are vulnerable and scared,
yeah,
and
very much so.
we don't always make good choices when we're in that space. And people in power know that, and they use it against them. So, yeah, I just like to hate millionaires. That feels safe.
Oh yeah, yeah, mostly it is. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, well, that's where I can direct my
That's right.
vitriol.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I maybe I'll write an essay about this someday. And so in some ways I might be throwing this
Are you workshopping? Go for it.
yeah.
Hmm.
Well, so like a lot of people, the consuming question is, so how do I live now?
Hmm. Hmm.
And and at the same time I'm working on this memoir. And part of the problem, I'm a poet to start with. That's my
Yeah.
hometown, as Onan, I would say. Um, so when I started writing it, I was so ignorant of how to handle a long book,
Hmm.
a whole book.
Hmm.
So I'm now struggling with, or let me see, that's another way to put it. I'm now engaged in the challenge of figuring how to take things that that are I think really lovely montages and portraits and figure out how to fit them into the arc of the
Hmm.
book.
Hmm.
So part of the problem is I think sometimes the things that don't fit what I'm learning from the school of hard knocks is well, it may not be that it may not the problem may not be that it doesn't fit. It may that be that you haven't figured out how to justify it. And so I started thinking, well, what's true about some of these stories and these people? And I was like, oh, I think there were two ways that I figured out how to survive the school for the blind. And I will say that the book gets complicated because as much as I hated going there, there are things I started to love about it. So anyway, I'm like, what? There were two things I seem to have done. One was find people whom I was drawn to and who thought I was special or loved me or, could
Yeah.
be a surrogate
Yeah.
parent or something like that, and friends. And the other was there was a way in which there's a lot of there's some hijinks and passive aggressive resistance to authority.
Hmm.
And it hit me. That's exactly how I should live now.
Hmm.
Just find the people whom I love and who love me,
Yeah.
and in some ways enjoy the resistance.
Yeah.
It's really fun to piss off people you think are wrong.
I mean, I think nothing frustrates them more than us living happily
Yeah,
in the midst of
yeah,
all of this chaos and not having them in our lives. Living happily without them.
yeah.
And I think just being open and true to our beliefs and speaking about them and supporting them and in large and small ways. I think I was talking with a friend yesterday about this, and we were talking about how there's this desire for these huge, like radical actions or whatever.
Hmm.
Like we go and we march on the Capitol and we, you know, riot or whatever. And um, okay, but also these small things, all that we're all doing, like buying books and giving them to people, and me giving oranges to everyone who walks by and talking to them
Mhm.
and seeing how they're doing, and you writing poetry, and you just talking about your reality as being a blind person, like,
Yeah.
and not apologizing for it, just being. These are acts of resistance, I believe. And
Yeah.
I think existing in a body and supporting other people and not apologizing for the space we take up as an act of resistance. It's taken me
It-
decades to get there.
yeah. Well, that's such a good place to be.
It's
Um,
hard.
yeah.
It's real
Yeah.
hard to get to a place where you don't hate yourself. I mean, maybe it's not hard for everybody, but it was hard for me.
Hmm.
So, um, damn, that's a lot of hard
Yeah.
work. You
Yeah, it
can't
is.
take it
Well,
away from me now.
yeah. 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 Well, that's great. And there's something about like the courage it takes to change if you were feeling self-hatred and
Yeah,
to like just say I'm gonna try and I'm sure there's lots of people who in some way or other probably influenced you to think, well, maybe I could
sure.
think about it differently. Yeah.
So many. And also, you ask yourself, who benefits from me liking, just hating myself, you know? And it's not the people who love me. It's not me. It's a bunch of other people. So, um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I I think what you're saying is true. How long were you at the School of the Blind for the Blind?
10 years from 1956 to 66, so ages 4 to 14.
Jesus, that's young.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. A- And even then, I mean, I didn't know this till later. Even then, it was a class influence thing.
Mm,
Pretty much, I mean, most people my from my generation went to schools for the blind
hmm
because the thinking was all the agencies for the blind um, said, uh, well, you parents you're not equipped. You don't have the resources. You don't know Braille.
hmm
How to, you don't know how to bring up a blind child. And in some cases, that's true. There are people who love the school for the blind because their parents felt such guilt or they coddled them. I don't know, they didn't treat them well. And so, of course, yeah, okay,
hmm
this school is better than
hmm
that.
Yeah,
Um, but I think my parents, it took me a while to make space for the fact that my parents were heartbroken to send us there. When I was little, it's like, how could they do this,
mm, yeah,
But I sort of accepted too, because they don't have a choice. But um, then I found uh, some friends I made, after I was in my 20s and 30s. I found out there, like one friend, her mother worked in the school district in
hmm
her state, and they had an idea of, yes, if we give parents the resources, and we give public schools the resources, they can live at home, you know. So, but my mom grew up on a farm. She was the first person to go to any school beyond high school. My dad was at the time a bus driver, uh, city bus driver in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. And they they kind of they trusted that if this is what the authorities were saying, it was probably true.
yep.
And so they just went along with it.
hmm I think that was much more of the way of being this institutional trust,
Yeah,
trust in institutions.
yeah,
Um, and I think, we just undervalue care in our society. And this is a symptom of that. Like, we couldn't possibly figure out how to help people care for their children. Instead, let's do this.
yeah,
This is the most efficient. way of raising these
And
children.
yep,
Hmm.
it's so interesting that I was just thinking of the word efficiency,
Yeah.
which has its
Yeah.
own meaning now. And it's like it in some ways it is the same. Let's it's financially, whatever, more efficient but it just has nothing to do with
People
people. Yeah.
or
Like you were
like
saying, like love is a sort of what do you, I guess a codicil to your idea that one of the things is that love matters. Love is makes the difference.
Mhm.
And I think I would say if you can put people over money, you're you're probably right all the time, 100% of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how much money do you need? Like how much money? I don't know. Anyway, it's a question I always have with people. Circling back to billionaires. It's like I
How
think
much do
it's
you need?
yeah, how much do you need? And I think it's an interesting study to just watch them. Like I don't think they seem happy or like they seem safe.
Yeah.
Kind of this idea that I think most of us, I was certainly raised with. My father grew up very poor, made money, believed that that was what made him a success,
Hmm.
believed that's what success was, and amassing wealth was the goal, the life goal. Um,
Yeah.
but why? I mean, we have tons of data to show that once you reach a certain level of comfort, which is not as high as people would imagine, your happiness does not increase
Yeah.
with more money.
Yeah.
Your sense of peace, your
Yeah.
sense of safety, it doesn't increase.
And we don't have a metric for measuring that, but you know it. You can tell.
Yes, and your happiness
And
actually
just,
goes down when you become uber wealthy. Because of course
yeah.
you think everyone wants to be friends with you because you're wealthy. And you're not wrong because you're
Yeah.
insufferable.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
It it kind of goes back to something. I forget if we were talking about this before you started
mhm,
recording or not, but this idea of writing and what we want from writing and what makes success
mm,
as a writer. And, so maybe you're not published by the big five and
mhm,
your book hasn't made like you're not, you haven't been,
mhm.
all the markers, you haven't been
Yep,
on Fresh Air or
yep.
whatever. Um,
You don't have a New York Times bestseller.
you don't have a New York Times bestseller.
Mhm.
It's really been interesting and wonderful living with Ona and watching her publicize her memoir Everywhere I Look, which is,
I
it's a
loved.
wonderful book, isn't it?
It is. It's a beautiful book
It's a beautiful book.
about
And
a very difficult topic.
yep,
You know,
and
the death of her sister, or the brutal death of her
the brutal
sister.
death, the murder of her sister.
Yes.
Yep. And I
What a
saw
gorgeous
her,
book.
from the very beginning, I was there when the song came on the radio, My Baby Loves Lovin',
Mm.
that just opened the floodgates for her. It's where she's like, if I don't tell this story, nobody will ever know her.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I saw her go through the publishing process and working with an agent, and they were at cross purposes sometimes, and I sent out the book. She thought it was ready, and it didn't get picked up, and she went back. I saw her go back to the drawing board several times and
Yeah.
make big changes, and just my heart was so with her,
Mhm.
and then to see her get the book out of it that she did. And she paid for publicists, and I'm going to guess that as well as the book has sold, she didn't break even.
Right.
But it's kind of like, but she's been really good for me in terms of like um saying, what, it's really about gratitude, in that like we get to write, we get to work at saying, well, what we believe is true, and to find out sort of what we think about it in the process, and to then be able to share it. Uh, it's wonderful that when you get an email from a stranger about a poem that you've written, and basically where that poem has touched you,
Mhm.
made a difference to you, and we get to do all that. And in some ways, like, how big does the circle have to be for you to be happy that you're doing what you're doing?
I think it's a question worth considering. I had a friend and she was saying, well, what do you want out of your memoir, which I've written?
Mhm.
And it's just sort of I've submitted a little, but it's mostly just there right now, just hanging out. And I said, I guess I just want it to reach the people who want it and need it. I
Yeah,
ultimately, obviously, it'd be great to make money and all of those things, but we all know that's not why we're doing it. So, and she said, well, is it possible that you're already reaching the people? You're
yeah,
already reaching people. And it made me cry
yeah. She's right.
because I think we think it's always further down the road.
Yeah, yeah,
And just to be where we are, right? I mean,
yeah,
I am so grateful for all the people that I've met through the series, through the Sibling Lost Book Club, like through all of these different things. My
yeah,
life has changed enormously. I have so many people in my life who make me feel less alone. I am grateful for their words. They give me hope every day.
yeah, yeah. So
That doesn't have a price tag.
no, no, really. And it's kind of like, look, we were talking about money. Like, if you have a lot, how much more why do people who have a lot of money seem to need more? But
Yeah, and I watched my dad live that life. I mean,
yeah,
I watched him, especially as he aged and got sick, like so consumed with talking about money, um, as if that would be his legacy. I mean, I think it was. He felt it was his legacy, um, and it's not.
yeah,
It's not a legacy. It's money. Yeah,
y-
it's not the same as relationships and feelings and inspiration and words. And I mean, it's just, uh, it's sad. It's capitalism, Like it's not serving us in our hearts. So it helps me to just name it. Like I'm
mhm,
so grateful that I have language to say like, oh, this is a system that wants me to care about money because that's how it continues to
yeah,
function.
yeah,
But it's not looking out for me.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And the pursuit. I mean, I guess we all have to think about that, even as writers. Like, I really want to keep, I want to keep putting my butt in the chair, because some days I have to make myself do it.
Sure.
Um, and I guess I was diagnosed with a lung disease a couple of years ago. And I mean, thank goodness the medication I'm taking has really slowed it down. I don't really feel it's had a major impact on my life so far.
That's
And I
wonderful.
don't really want it to have a major uh, control of my how I live.
Mhm.
But it does make you think about, okay, as there's a really great song I recommend by John Mayer called "Stop This Train,"
Mhm.
and it's really about getting older and having to, like, the number games you play, like for how much life you still have left, start going,
Yeah.
uh, changing your
Yep.
perspective. And so I think it's like, but at the same time, I have to remember sometimes, call your sisters, call this friend, or call this person who just lost somebody,
Mhm.
to make time in my day. And I'm really good if I think somebody else has not been calling me. I'm very clear how long that's been, but I'm not always as clear about, like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah. Who are the people
Right. It's a two-way
I'm
street.
forgetting? Yeah, right.
Mm,
So
yeah. Reciprocity is important, right?
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's nice to
Yeah.
feel like you're not in it alone in a relationship. And
Yeah.
and I really have prioritized that as I've gotten
Yeah.
older.
That's very clear. I love how you live.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. That's a really lovely compliment.
Oh.
Thank you.
Hey, Allison, I don't know if I'll remember this exactly, but and I don't know why it's this is one of those poems. It's the shortest poem I know by Mary Oliver.
Mm.
I'll see if I can remember. It's called Don't Worry. It's two lines. Things take the time they take. Don't worry. How many roads did St. Augustine walk down before he became St. Augustine?
Is that the end?
That's the end. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, how many?
Yeah. I think a lot.
I do
He,
too. I just
he
wondered
had,
if we were going to get an exact number. We probably
well,
don't know. We just know
yeah.
he was a real wanderer,
He
right?
was a wanderer and
Yeah.
he went from I think the right word sybarite to a saint, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, so I don't know. I don't for some reason I just brought that up because I think it's one that even at 73, I'm like, look, things take the time they take.
I sure do.
Um, at the same time,
Nothing you can
I
do to change it.
no, I mean, everything for me, probably if I have a problem, it's like I look at everything from both sides. Sometimes it can be, it's like, well, yes, okay, things take the time they take, so just, relax and go with it. But the other part is like, yeah, but if you don't like get your ass in the chair, nothing's going to happen. So it's
That's the
kind of like you
balance.
can't let yourself off the hook all the time by, but
Yeah.
I
That's
think
the balance with everything, right? I mean, it's
that's
the
the
same thing
balance.
with
Yeah.
acts of resistance. We
Yeah.
aren't just existing. We also need to do things, but you also can't be doing things all the time.
Yeah.
Like we
Yeah.
have to, yeah. It's being a human being is not an easy trick, you know?
No.
It's a challenge for all in different ways. But
Yeah.
I could talk to you all day, Dan, but we should probably wrap up. Thank you.
Oh,
Well,
I
I'm gonna
love
stop
talking to you.
recording and then we'll say goodbye after we stop recording. But I just wanted to say thank you for
Oh,
um for your poem also that I used in a forum. That was
mhm.
I love thank you for that and thank you for this poem and um just you and Ona are just wonderful, kind,
Mhm.
generous people and I'm grateful to know you. So, thank
Oh,
you.
thank you, Allison. Well, it's really been my pleasure, and I'm really glad you invited me because I really wanted more time to get to know you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.